Hello, welcome to Let's Talk Jonesboro. It's a good day in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I'm Roy Okert, and I'll be your host for this edition. Our guest today is Lieutenant Todd Nelson, who is Director of the Jonesboro Quality of Life Department, and we're going to be talking mostly about a new Jonesboro Property Management Code, which is now in effect. Last year, the city of Jonesboro had a long-running debate, really, over whether this should be adopted, and finally in December it was adopted by the City Council on a 6-6 vote, with Mayor Perrin deciding the key vote. So before we get into the details of that and what's going to happen, tell us a little bit about your department, what you do, and why you're going to be so heavily involved in this.
Several years ago, our then acting chief saw the need to fold code enforcement into the police department. And everyone's heard of the broken window theory of law enforcement, which basically says that, that deterioration in a community will attract crime, and in the same manner, crime actually helps further along deterioration. So it becomes a cycle. So by using code enforcement in a directed path, we can actually reduce crime by improving the appearance of a neighborhood. We can not only do that, we can reduce the fear of crime, which when you talk about actual crime that occurs and the fear of crime, to the citizen in Jonesboro, there really is no different. If someone's afraid that something's going to happen, their heart beats the same as if something is happening. So we try to address both of those, both reducing the risk of crime and the fear of crime, by improving the neighborhood, showing our neighborhoods, showing that people care about the neighborhood, actually furthers the use of a neighborhood by its inhabitants. So you have more people out on their front porch or walking down the street, which means there's less opportunity for crime to occur. So really where deterioration may attract crime, improving the community actually reduces the risk of crime.
And you alluded to it, you are a police officer.
Yes.
And your department is directly related to the police department.
Yes, we are.
And your background is in police work?
It is. I started in Jonesboro in 1993 as a patrolman. Jonesboro has been the only city that I ever worked for is in police work. When I decided to go in law enforcement, I actually did some research and looked at North Little Rock, Fayetteville, Jonesboro, Rogers, Springdale area. I looked at all the departments, and actually we lived here in Jonesboro, but I wanted to make sure I was making a good decision. And even then, we were competitive in all areas and actually stood out in several. So I chose to come to work at Jonesboro.
And Todd, you were involved from the beginning of the discussions about the need for a property maintenance code. Tell us about how that began and why.
I think it's been addressed in years past, long before I ever got involved in anything. But our building inspector at the time, we had a moratorium committee meeting through the city council, and one of their recommendations was some sort of property maintenance code. Now they were looking at multifamily. That was their charge, was to look at multifamily. So their recommendation had to do with multifamily. But a quick look says you can't enforce one set of rules for one group of people and not for everyone else. So we started a process looking at a property maintenance code at the time for all of Jonesboro. One of the things that we found quickly was that most larger cities, most larger communities, and certainly the top 100 cities to live in America have a property maintenance code. It is ubiquitous. So we started down that path. We formed a committee to look at a property maintenance code. Kind of on the front end made some decisions and assumptions that turned out to be wrong. One of the assumptions that we made was it's been tried in the past So we have to try to come up with a watered down version on the front end. And again, like I think that was kind of a flaw in our logic at the time. With some personnel change, that kind of died down. Basically, other matters took precedent in the city, and so Chris Moore, our councilman, saw the need, and again, kind of revved that back up, and so we formed a second committee with the focus on the front end of looking at everything, just taking an honest, open look at everything available in a property maintenance code, and then not taking anything off the table and curtailing that to Jonesboro, which is what we ended up with in the final product.
And one of the controversies in the debate was whether it would cover both interior and exterior.
It was.
And finally it was decided to cover both.
Correct. One of the prevailing ideas was that this code was meant for the health, safety, and welfare of the occupants and surrounding neighbors of a property. So if we make the outside pretty but we don't make the inside safe, what really have we accomplished? And there's several communities in the nation that have an exterior only property maintenance code, but I don't think you can sincerely say that that you care about the health and safety of a group of folks if you're only looking at the exterior skeleton and not looking at the interior, which involves heat and electric and water situations, because I mean they can be dangerous or deadly.
The code goes into effect 30 days after the council passed it, which
Right.
is late January, I believe.
Right.
The city administration has decided to have a 60-day moratorium after that.
Right.
The purpose is to educate people, because there's some fear of property owners
Sure.
about what might happen as a result of this code. Talk about what's going to happen during that 60 days.
Actually, this is one of the things that's going to happen. Is our goal is to just bring to the public what it says and what it doesn't say. There was some opposition for this code based on what the code says. That a certain group did not want this to apply. But I believe, and what I saw from folks is far more of the opposition was based on fear of what they didn't know. And so when the folks that sat down with it and looked at the entire code with an open mind, this is what they came up with. Our committee, we went through this code line by line, and all of them, the entire board or the entire committee was unanimous on everything to do with the exterior of the code. Where they split was 6-3 on incorporating the interior. And I took them at their word. They came in open-minded to look at this, and I believe they did a very, very good job of patiently looking through this code. We talked about different things that might come up. Did we solve every problem that could possibly come up? You can't, no. But we covered, I think, everything that we could think of. And so when we took it to the public in different forums, we had, again, mixed response, but what we found was the information that was being pushed out wasn't always accurate. So it was slanted one way or the other. So what we want to do is kind of take a step back and give people the opportunity to ask questions, either by calling myself or Tim Renshaw, the chief building official, by reading the code online, and basically just giving them the opportunity to take a step back, decompress a little bit, and then start asking, how is this going to be enforced? And we're going to, again, positively put that information out as to what are we going to do next? What's our next step? What properties are we going to address? And how will the process work?
Let's talk about the process now. As to what happens when the 60 days, the education period has expired. This is going to be implemented.
Right.
And if I let my grass grow a little too long next summer, what happens then?
Well, and grass isn't addressed in the property maintenance code. That is a code that we've had for years and years, long before I ever got involved in it. So that will be addressed the same way it has been, which is we generally, the first of the year when that starts to happen, we'll go out and give people a warning. Our code officers are professional, they're courteous and polite, and so they're going to go out and give people a warning and say, hey, this is too tall, it's got to be corrected. And once it gets corrected, it's generally not an issue. Once people get in that spring groove of, hey, I've got to mow my grass every 7 to 10 days, it generally gets done. Now the property maintenance code,
it's going to be something more serious.
It's right. It's a little bit different in that Mayor Perrin from the front end wanted this to be complaint based. So we will look for our citizens to tell us where to go work. So if once a complaint comes in, we will send somebody out, look at the complaint to find out if it's valid. If it's on the exterior of a property, it's pretty simple to go there and see it. If it's on the interior, then the process, I don't want to say gets more complicated, but we take our time. We slow down and make sure we cover steps, because this code adheres to the Fourth Amendment, which is the search and seizure amendment. And so we will be compliant with that. As a law enforcement officer, that has been drilled into us, that a man's home is his castle, and so once you cross that plane, you're in a different realm, and so you have to make sure the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and you do things the right way.
But it starts with a complaint by somebody. Your officers are not going to be going out looking for violations, particularly.
No, no. And the public, again, will tell us where to work. They do that now anyway. The concerns, if something bothers a citizen, if it's a concern for them, they're going to let us know, and generally do. And so once that complaint's received, then we'll go out and respond to it.
And when you go out, your officers go out to investigate a complaint, what do you do?
Well, if it's on the outside and they can see that it is a violation, our first step is to contact the owner of the property, let them know that there's a violation there, and give them the parameters of what needs to happen for it to be corrected. The time frame on how long they have that is dependent on what it is. I mean, if it's something simple that might take little to no money and very little effort to do, that can be as short as 60 days, and that's the minimum time that we have. If it's something more intensive, if it's the soffit that's rotted and falling out of the house, that's going to require a permit to work in the city, and so that permit has a deadline date built into it. That's 180 days, and that can even be extended. So if a permit's required, then the time frame of the permit is what dictates the time frame to correct the complaint.
And many times you're dealing with an occupant of a house who's a renter, whereas the owner, the one who's responsible, it may be absentee. What do you go after the owner though in order to get the problem corrected?
And I wouldn't say many times, but we have those complaints have come in the past, and so we anticipate some of them coming in the future. But yes, there's some responsibility on the tenant as well as on the owner of the property. So if it's the owner's responsibility to address it, then yes, we will contact the owner directly.
And at some point, you may need to cite the owner or tenant or both.
Yeah, and that's down the road. I mean, again, this is not a revenue generator. Our goal is not to try to increase revenue for the city. Our goal is try to lower crime. and give people the opportunity to enjoy the property that they do own. So with that in mind, citing someone to court is a last resort. I mean, that's one of the last things that we want to do. Quite frankly, what we find is with everything else in code enforcement related, we have about a 97% rate of owners taking care of what they're supposed to be responsible for. And I don't anticipate this being any different. I think we will achieve compliance from folks without citing hardly anyone. I may be optimistic on that, but that's just kind of the way I choose to look at life anyway. So if the owner does not correct the issue, then yes, there are some mechanisms down the road to cite them to court.
There's an appeal process. That occurs before the citation?
That occurs on basically the front end. Okay. So if we issue an owner of a property an order to repair something, if they either feel that the order to repair shouldn't apply to them, if this ordinance doesn't apply, that they're not in violation of it, or if they feel that the order that we've given, that other corrective action could be taken rather than what was on the order, they can appeal that. The appeals board is going to be made up of 3 to 5 members of non-city employee folks that have a knowledge in construction, and so I mean it could be engineer or architect or contractor, but they're going to have the knowledge to look at the complaint. And if they say that, hey, the owner's correct, that this shouldn't apply to them, then it's over. If they say, well, yes, this part of the code applies to them, but your recommendation might be, if they're told to do one thing and all they have to do is another that's less intrusive, the board can say, okay, they do have to correct it, but they can correct it with this measure. So one of either of those can happen, or they can uphold the order to repair, and that will have to occur within 60 days of the initial complaint. So they have the owner that receives the notice has 30 days to file an appeal, and then the appeals board has 30 days to hear that and make a recommendation or make a decision on that.
As you said, the ordinance provides for an appeal board of 3 to 5 people. Right. The mayor has said that he would name 5 people and maybe a couple of alternates, right, so that there's always a 5-member board to deal with that. Talk a little bit about the interior now. As you say, you can see the problems on the exterior, but what are you looking for on the interior?
Well, again, the code is pretty specific as far as light and ventilation, electrical, and heat and air, as well as fire safety. And I said air. Air conditioning is not a requirement of this code. But if the air conditioning becomes unsafe, if there's something unsafe, it can be addressed that way. But those are the general things that we're going to look at on the inside. Now, if a complaint comes and it's on the inside, again, our number one goal is to make sure that we do things the right way, legally, ethically, and morally. So if someone complains about something on the inside, our first step is to contact the owner and let them know that a complaint's been received, and ask them if they will let us look at that. And if they say no, then most of the time we're going to be done. That we're not going to have the authority to take that any further. Now, in an extreme case, and to give you an example, if a tenant of a property lives in an apartment or a house, and the entire place has been wired with electrical cords, that's dangerous. I mean, that's Tim Renshaw, again, the chief building official, will tell you that's a recipe for somebody getting hurt or killed. So if that were the case, and then that tenant somehow said, no, you're not allowed to enter the house, there could be a remedy for us to seek a search warrant through a judge. Again, it would have to be probably that extreme or even more. There would have to be a threat of imminent danger to someone.
Now, once you do if you cite someone to district court, it's a misdemeanor complaint, right?
No, actually, it's not a misdemeanor. That was kind of some of the information. It is technically called a violation. There is no
civil complaint.
It is more of a civil complaint. It is not a. It's not going to go on anyone's criminal record as they've been convicted of a misdemeanor crime or any other crime. It is a violation. But again, even there's further steps beyond that, or before that comes into effect. So if for instance we have an owner that doesn't comply within the time limit, and if that time limit was 6 months, then they still didn't comply, again, our effort is not to cite someone to court. So we're going to try to contact them and find out why. Why didn't they comply with the order? If it was financial means, then we're prepared to work with the grants department as well as other nonprofit groups in the city to try to get that person the financial or even the labor or skill help that they need to get that brought into compliance. Our goal from the start of this is to make Jonesboro better, not to punish folks. So even if all those fall through and they get cited, then they still have the opportunity to go to court, to argue their case in front of a judge, and even appeal that judge's decision should it not go their way.
So it goes to district court first, but it could be appealed to circuit court.
Certainly.
You mentioned that one of the goals of your department and the code itself is to help people correct problems. And one of the fears that many people have had is you've got some old people who've been in their property for a long time and who have a problem that they can't fix. What are you going to do about that?
Really, like I said, the grants department has, and we've worked with the grants department in the past for a rehabilitation grant to rehab a house. And then again, there's been a nonprofit group in Jonesboro since this code came into effect that their goal is going to be to seek out and help folks that can't help themselves to correct issues. So we'll reach out to both those groups. Many of the local churches have also said, hey, we want to get involved and we want to help people. And I think that shows the strength of our community. And so we will leverage the strength of that community to try to, again, help folks that can't help themselves.
So your office will be developing maybe a resource guide, or at
Sure.
least an informal one,
Sure.
to be able to identify all those organizations that might be able to help.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've seen this in the past where, again, trying to work through grants department, that we see a house that needs to be rehabbed. So it's not in bad enough shape that it needs to be condemned, but they've got problems and it's probably going to lead to a condemnation someday. And contacted them and just said, hey, this resource is available. Why don't you try to take advantage of it? And have been told, no, we don't want to. So with this ordinance, this will, I think, provide that catalyst that says, okay, you're going to have to fix it, but there's also these resources available. So again, without that catalyst, I think there's help out here that's not been used just for one reason or another. I don't know why.
Now, you mentioned the possibility of a condemnation. That's really a separate process, so is it not?
It is.
How does that become a factor in something like this?
Well, the goal of a property maintenance code is to reduce the chances of a structure needing to be condemned. We condemn structures in the city because they become unlivable, because they become structurally unsound. And that happens because properties aren't maintained. So if properties are maintained properly, then it remains strong and sound, and structurally able to be used for its intended use. Now, if those things don't happen, if there is not maintenance, for instance, if you get a leak in your roof and you don't repair it, you're going to have more than a leaky roof problem. You're going to have rot in the structure, in the bones of your house, which is going to, again, cause the system of your house to fail. A wall might become unable to carry the load, so then you end up with a collapsing roof, which is going to cause more water damage. So again, the maintenance on the front end, it goes back to an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Condemnation is that pound of cure. That's the, again, most drastic step that we can take. And quite frankly, we've used it too often. Not because we wanted to, but because we had structures that have been not properly maintained and have gotten in that bad a shape.
So you think the code will maybe reduce the number of condemnations?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We might not see that within the first year or 2 years, but I think 3 to 5 years and certainly 20 years down the road, we're going to reap great benefits from this, just in being able to keep some of our great older houses.
But the condemnation goes through the city council.
Yes.
It's a formal process.
It is.
Whereas the code is not a city council business.
Right.
No case goes before the city council at any point.
No, at this point we don't foresee anything going in front of the city council. Now again, should we go and address a property and if it's in really bad shape but not condemnable, then we might have some decisions to make down the road. We could actually ask the city council to condemn a property with the purpose of rehabilitating the property. Just because it's condemned doesn't mean it has to be torn down. We've seen that in the last few years that all of them that have been condemned have been torn down, or most of them been torn down. But that's simply because what we've been addressing in the condemnation process is really the worst of the worst houses and structures in Jonesboro.
The code applies to commercial buildings as well as residential?
Yes, it applies to any structure in Jonesboro, so commercial, industrial, or residential.
So as somebody asked, even the city has to maintain its buildings, or you get involved in that?
We
perhaps?
We do, and you know, I think it's unethical to ask somebody else to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. That's how I grew up, and then that's my military career was kind of built on that. My law enforcement career has been built on that. Is I'm not going to ask anybody else to do something that I'm not willing to do myself.
We're about out of time, Todd, but when the 60 days expires, do you expect a lot of new business?
I don't know. I think we've already seen and talked to folks that are already starting to, knowing that it's on the horizon, already starting to make the repairs that they know they should have made. I tell an anecdotal story. I went to a guy's house last year and a half ago or so. One of my code guys was out, so I went to address one of his complaints and told him that he had to correct a certain issue, and his wife was behind him, thanking me for being out there. So, you know, we tend to put off things that we know that we need to do, and with this coming out, I think some of the folks out there that know they've needed to do some things to their house are doing them now.
I appreciate your taking time to be with us today, and good luck with the education period, especially because that may reduce the amount of work you've got to do in the long term. And we appreciate the viewers for tuning in. You have a maintenance code book which is available through your office, I presume, to somebody.
Right. It's also online.
It's online on the city's website, jonesboro.org. Plus, if they have questions, I'm sure they will call your office.
Sure.
And already have. Okay. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.